Okay, let's move on to Russia then. And well, the first news is that the British government has decided that the Wagner Group needs to be made a terrorist organization. It's going to be prescribed. So let's look at what the Home Office said. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has today, that was on Wednesday, laid before Parliament a draft order to prescribe Wagner Group under the Terrorism Act 2000. Wagner Group is a proxy military force of Vladimir Putin's Russia, which operates across the globe. Okay, what about all the proxy forces that the UK uses across the globe? Do they get also prescribed?
No, of course not.
Right.
No, different rules apply to those.
Different rules, okay. So let's look on what they said. Once agreed, the order will come into force on the 13th of September, making it a criminal offence to belong to, encourage support for, assist or use the logo of that group. Now you can see that I've used the logo of that group in this graphic, so perhaps following the 13th of September, I'm not allowed to do that anymore. Certain prescription offences can be punishable by up to 14 years in prison, which can be handed down alongside or in place of a fine. So there you go. That's what they're doing.
So this is the rules-based international order who make up a rule. It's then enforced, and that's how democracy on a global scale works.
Absolutely. In the meantime, this is Sergei Narishkin, who is, well, effectively, I suppose we could say he's C in Russia because he's the head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Services. And he was speaking to TASS a couple of days ago, and he had this to say. He said, Great Britain has for many centuries been and still remains a dangerous geopolitical adversary of our country, that being Russia, of course. The many wars and conflicts that were triggered in Europe involving Russia against its interests can often be traced back to London. Examples of behind-the-scenes intrigues and provocations by the British against our country number not just in the dozens, but in the hundreds. But then he went on to say that the UK has long played a subsidiary and not a leading role in the US-British tandem. And Vanessa, I would just say that I disagree with that statement in the sense that, okay, the UK hasn't had for a very long time the sort of kinetic strength of military force that the United States has. But Britain has always played this sort of manipulation role in encouraging other people to act as its proxy. And I would then ask, in fact, do we prescribe the entire United States military? Because it has been acting, in my view, as a British proxy in many ways for quite a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And meanwhile, the BBC is quite happy to chummy up with prescribed terrorists in Idlib and absolute. So are they going to get 14 years in prison for supporting and endorsing a terrorist organization?
That sounds like a campaign somebody needs to run. But let's move on then, Vanessa, to Armenia.
Well, I mean, I first of all immediately have to say I'm not an expert in Armenia, but there is a large Armenian community inside Syria itself. And I rely very much on a dear friend and colleague, Kevork Almasyan, whose report I've included in mine. And you know, people should follow him. He has a very clear indication that there is about to be an escalation in the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, of course, with the hands of Israel and Turkey in Azerbaijan. Particularly, Israel is supplying the majority of the weapons to Azerbaijan. But also internally, Pashinyan, the Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan of Armenia in Yerevan, has for a long time actually been working on behalf of NATO, trying to frustrate the Russians to the extent where they abandon the region. And that includes, of course, giving up their military base on the border with Turkey. So here, this was back in May 2023. Nikol Pashinyan was quoted on Monday indicating sweeping changes in his country's policy vis-a-vis its arch-foe Azerbaijan and its ally Russia. Armenia is ready to recognize the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave as part of Azerbaijan. So basically Pashinyan, who has already ceded strategic territory, particularly in the heights of Armenia, which gives Azerbaijan a military advantage from which they have already been shelling and firing on Armenia for some time now. If Baku in Azerbaijan guarantees the security of its ethnic Armenian population. The Russian state news agency TASS and the Russian news outlet Ostorozo and Novosti quoted Pashinyan as saying on Monday. So basically, if we have a look at the map that shows very clearly this territory, Nagorno-Karabakh, in the circle, or Artsakh, as Armenians know it as. It's basically now a buffer zone with Russian peacekeeping troops inside. It's been under blockade by Azerbaijan for some years now. And so basically, effectively, it's rather like Gaza. It is pretty much under blockade. It's constantly being fired on. Farmers currently are being fired on while they're trying to harvest their crops. And as I said, Pashinyan is believed to be working on behalf of NATO. So if he basically hands over this territory, that will mean that the Russian peacekeeping troops will leave that territory. This is a quick video that I've sort of edited slightly by Kevork, which will give you a little bit more background.
So the rule number one should be, when you want to give concessions or strike a peace deal with your enemy, is that your enemy is willing to adhere to the principles of a peace agreement. And this doesn't exist in Baku and in Ankara. This is number one. Number two, even if we put aside all this, geographically speaking, the region of Artsakh represented a buffer zone between Armenia proper and Azerbaijan. And from the military point of view, it's very important for Armenia to hold this territory in order to keep the danger away from Armenia proper. This is very simple geomilitary aspect. And this was the case, for example, after the Lebanese civil war, when the Syrian side intervened militarily in Lebanon, because the Israeli side also intervened. So the rule of engagement was, we fight each other on the Lebanese territories. Syria wants to fight Israel on the Lebanese territories, so that the infighting and the fighting do not split into the Syrian territories. And once Syria withdrew in a humiliating way from Lebanon in 2005, the fighting has moved to Syria in 2011. This was very clear that it's going to happen also in Armenia. And I am saying this with a heavy heart. I do believe that there is going to be battles inside the Armenian territories when and or if the Armenians lose Artsakh completely. And in my opinion, if Pashinyan stays in power longer, in the next, let's say, a year or two, we're going to face one of these two scenarios. One, it's either Armenia is going to lose Artsakh completely by military means from the Azerbaijani side, which means complete ethnic cleansing, which means the Armenians will be forced to move to Armenia proper. Or second, they will be absorbed in the Azerbaijani society, which has millions of Azeri people, which also practically means that they will be assimilated in the Azeri society on the short and the medium run. And they will also lose their identity. They will lose their culture, and accordingly, it will also be a sort of an ethnic cleansing. So, in my opinion, if Pashinyan stays in power, Armenians are going to lose Artsakh, whether through diplomatic means or through military means, and in both cases.
So basically what Kevork is saying is that there is an impending full-scale attack by Azerbaijan against Armenia, and I recommend that everybody watches this fascinating interview with Armenian Alison Tarmasian Muse, M-E-U-S-E, and also follow her on Twitter. Right now, there is an escalation. Journalists that are against the regime of Pashinyan are basically getting arrested, as she actually reported this morning. Things are hotting up, and of course it's part of the global war against Russia and Russia influence. And here Pashinyan, Armenia to exercise with US troops next week in a sign of frustration with Russia. Well, I mean, the feeling is mutual. Russia is definitely recognizing the fact that Pashinyan is pushing for Turkish influence in Armenia, and therefore, of course, NATO expansionism into Armenia, which will also impact on Iran, that uses the Karabakh corridor to bypass Turkey through Georgia into Russia.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.